The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a soft hiss. Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked through them, her black diplomatic uniform a stark contrast to the shimmering robes and strange forms of the alien representatives already seated around the circular hall. Her heart pounded, but she kept her face calm. This was humanity's first formal introduction to galactic civilization. The chamber was enormous, carved from a single piece of crystal that seemed to glow from within. 12 different species sat at their designated platforms, each one representing millions of worlds and trillions of beings. Elena had studied them all during the long journey to Nexus Prime, but seeing them in person was still overwhelming. Hi. Arbitrator Kethvar rose from the central platform. The Zephyrian looked like a walking mountain of living crystal, light dancing through his transparent body as he moved. When he spoke, his voice rang like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Welcome, representative of the species called humans," Kethvar said. "We have gathered to evaluate your people's readiness to join galactic civilization." Elena bowed respectfully. "Thank you, High Arbitrator. Humanity is honored by this opportunity." A deep, rumbling laugh came from the Corvani section. "War Marshal." Thorax stood up, his massive frame covered in thick gray hide marked with battle scars. He was nearly 3 meters tall, with tusks that jutted from his lower jaw like ivory daggers. "Honored?" Thorax's voice was like grinding stone. "Little human, you should be grateful we even noticed your tiny world spinning in the darkness." Other representatives shifted in their seats. Elena could feel their eyes upon her, studying, judging. Dr. Zil Neth, the Vorthan xenobiologist, watched her with large, black eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. His pale, elongated form reminded Elena of the classical paintings of angels she had seen as a child, but there was nothing divine about the cold intelligence in his gaze. "Let us begin the evaluation," Kethvar announced. A holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber. First, military capabilities. Images of human weapons appeared in the air. Rifles, tanks, fighter jets, and nuclear missiles rotated slowly for all to see. Elena watched the alien faces, hoping to see some sign of approval. Instead, she saw amusement. Kinetic projectiles. Thorax snorted. "Chemical explosives? How wonderfully primitive. My people were throwing rocks with more sophistication than this 10,000 years ago." The luminary representative, a being of pure energy contained within a force field, spoke in a voice like singing crystals. "The fusion devices show promise, but the delivery systems are crude. They're most powerful. Weapons can barely crack a moon." "Next," Kethvar continued, "scientific advancement." More images appeared. Telescopes, particle accelerators, space stations, and medical equipment. Elena felt a spark of pride. Humanity had achieved so much in just a few centuries of rapid development. Dr. Zilneth leaned forward. "Interesting, but centuries behind galactic standard. They have only just begun to understand quantum mechanics. Their medical knowledge is adequate for their current needs, but limited. Their spaceflight is particularly amusing," added a representative from the collective, the hive mind species that spoke in perfect unison. "Chemical rockets, how charmingly inefficient." Elena's hands clenched at her sides, but she remained silent. This was going worse than she had feared. "Finally," Kethvar said, "cultural contributions." The display changed to show human art, literature, and music. Paintings by Da Vinci and Picasso, sculptures by Michelangelo, books by Shakespeare and Einstein. Elena felt hope return. Surely they would appreciate humanity's artistic achievements. "Curious," Dr. Zilneth mused. "Visual representations of their world, stories of their experiences. Primitive, but showing some creative potential. And this?" Thorak pointed at musical notations and instruments floating in the display. "They call it music," Kethvar explained. "Organized sound patterns apparently used for emotional expression and entertainment." Thorak's laugh boomed through the chamber. "Music? Those chaotic noise patterns? We studied their transmissions, random screeching and banging without mathematical foundation." Elena couldn't stay silent anymore. With respect, War Marshal, human music is far from random. It follows complex mathematical relationships, harmonic progressions, and silence. Thorak cut her off. True music is pure mathematics made audible. The Zephyrians understand this. Their crystal songs follow perfect mathematical formulas. The Vorthon tone poems are precise calculations of frequency and time. Your human noise is chaos, the luminary representative chimed in agreement. Our light songs are based on quantum harmonics. Even the warlike Korvani battle hymns follow strict mathematical rules. What the humans call music, added the collective, violates every principle of organized sound. It contains errors, imperfections, random variations that serve no logical purpose. Elena felt heat rising in her cheeks. Those imperfections are what make it beautiful, the slight variations, the emotional expressions. Emotions, Thorak spat. Another primitive trait your species has failed to evolve beyond. Dr. Zilneth raised one long finger. The human does raise an interesting point about their sound patterns. Perhaps we should hear an example before dismissing it entirely. Kethvar's crystal form brightened slightly. An amusing suggestion. Very well, human. Representative, demonstrate this music of yours. We could use some entertainment. Laughter rippled through the chamber. Elena's face burned with shame, but she forced herself to stand straight. She reached into her diplomatic case and pulled out a small device. This is a recording of one of our classical pieces, she said. It was composed by Johann Sebastian Bach over 400 years ago. 400 years? Thorak chuckled. Ancient history to such a young species. Elena activated the device. The opening notes of Bach's Air on the G string filled the chamber. The melody was simple, pure, flowing like water over stones. She watched the alien faces as the music played. Most showed polite confusion or barely concealed amusement. The collective's representatives sat perfectly still, their shared mind apparently trying to analyze the mathematical structure and failing, the luminary being flickered with colors that Elena hoped were not expressions of annoyance. But Dr. Zilneth was different. The Vorthon's black eyes had grown wider and he leaned forward in his seat. His pale hands gripped the edges of his platform. And for just a moment Elena thought she saw something like wonder cross his alien features. But then the music ended, and he quickly composed himself. Interesting, Kethvar said in a tone that made it clear he found it anything but. Chaotic, as predicted, but with some attempt at structure. Emotional noise, Thorak declared, as expected from a species still controlled by primitive feelings. The vote was unanimous. Humanity was classified as a Class C developing species, requiring supervision and guidance from their galactic betters. They would be allowed limited trade and communication, but were barred from joining the Council or participating in major galactic affairs until they proved themselves worthy. Elena listened to the judgment with a heavy heart. As she prepared to leave, she noticed Dr. Zilneth watching her intently. For just a moment, their eyes met across the chamber. The Vorthon's expression was unreadable, but something in his gaze suggested their encounter was not over. The great doors closed behind her with a sound like the sealing of humanity's fate. But Elena carried with her the memory of that brief moment when Bach's music had touched something deep within at least one alien mind. She did not yet know that this moment would change everything. Dr. Zilneth stood at the observation deck of his research vessel, watching Earth grow larger through the transparent aluminum viewport. 3 months had passed since the humiliation of humanity in the Galactic Council chambers, but he could not forget the strange sensations he had experienced during their musical demonstration. His official mission was a routine xenological survey of the newly discovered human homeworld. His real purpose was far different. The Vorthon scientist needed to understand what had happened to him when that primitive music played. His ship, the Analytical Mind, received clearance to land at the newly constructed diplomatic spaceport in Lidoria, Geneva. Earth's officials greeted him with the nervous enthusiasm typical of species eager to please their galactic superiors. He was escorted to a research facility where he would meet his assigned human counterpart, Dr. Sarah Chen was not what he expected. The human woman was small by Vorthan standards, with graying hair pulled back in a practical style. Her dark eyes held intelligence and something else he had not anticipated in a supposedly primitive species: dignity. "Dr. Zilneth," she said, offering the human greeting gesture of extending her hand. "Welcome to Earth. I'm honored to work with such a distinguished researcher." He studied her carefully as he accepted the handshake with his long, pale fingers. "Dr. Chen, your credentials suggest expertise in both xenopsychology and musical theory, an unusual combination." She smiled. "I was a concert pianist before I became a scientist. Music and the mind have always fascinated me. When we learned about your visit, I hoped we might discuss what happened at the council meeting." Zilneth felt that strange stirring again, just at the mention of music. Ambassador Vasquez's demonstration was noteworthy. "I am curious about the theoretical foundations of your musical systems." For the next several days, they worked together in Sarah's laboratory. She explained human music theory while he shared the mathematical principles underlying galactic musical traditions. The difference was striking. "Your people create music like building a perfect crystal structure," Sarah observed, studying Zilneth's notations. "Every note calculated, every harmony following precise mathematical laws." "As it should be," Zilneth replied. "Random elements serve no purpose in organized sound." Sarah played him examples of Zephyrian crystal songs and Vorthan tone poems. They were beautiful in their perfection, like mathematical equations made audible, but they left him feeling empty in a way he had never noticed before. "Now listen to this," Sarah said, activating her music player. The opening chords of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony filled the room. Zilneth felt it immediately. That same strange sensation from the council chambers, but stronger now. It was as if something long dormant in his mind was awakening. His neural pathways seemed to light up in patterns he had never experienced. "Stop," he said, his voice shaking slightly. Sarah paused the music. "Are you all right?" Zilneth's black eyes were wide with wonder and fear. "What is happening to me?" Over the following weeks, they experimented carefully. Using advanced brain imaging equipment, they discovered something remarkable. Human music activated neural networks that galactic music left completely untouched. These pathways existed in Vorthan brains, and according to Sarah's xenological databases, in most other galactic species as well, but they remained dormant throughout their entire lives. "It's the imperfections," Sarah explained excitedly. "The slight variations in timing, the emotional expression, the controlled chaos. Your mathematical music is too perfect. It follows expected patterns, so your brains don't need to engage these deeper networks to process it." "But human music," Zilneth whispered. "Human music makes your brain work harder. It has to interpret emotion, predict variations, resolve unexpected harmonies. That activates dormant systems that have been sleeping for millions of years of evolution." They tested different musical styles. Classical pieces activated problem-solving centers. Jazz improvisation awakened creativity pathways. Even simple folk songs stimulated emotional processing areas that had never been used in Zilneth's lifetime. Kamidal. Implications were staggering, but they were also dangerous. Word of their research began to spread through unofficial channels. Other scientists requested samples of human music for their own studies. The results were consistent across species. Zephyrians exposed to human melodies found their crystal songs gaining new depth and complexity. Corvani warriors who heard human war chants reported feelings of inspiration, unlike anything in their battle hymns. Even the logical collective began, experiencing something unprecedented: individual thoughts within their hive mind when exposed to human jazz music. Sarah and Zilneth tried to keep their research secret, but it was impossible. Too many beings were hungry for these new sensations. Underground networks formed to distribute human music throughout the galaxy. Secret concerts were held in abandoned space stations. Musicians from different species began creating hybrid compositions, combining mathematical precision with human emotional chaos. The changes were subtle at first. enhanced cognitive abilities, increased creativity, better problem-solving skills. But then the authorities began to notice something else. Populations exposed to human music became less compliant, more questioning of authority. On Korvax Prime, workers who had listened to human blues music began demanding better conditions. On Zephyria, crystal singers started improvising during official ceremonies, adding unauthorized emotional variations to pure mathematical compositions. Even on the logical world of Vorth, scientists began questioning established theories and pursuing research in forbidden directions. The Galactic Council noticed. War Marshal Thorak's report to the High Arbitrator was filled with barely controlled rage. "The human contamination is spreading," he declared. "Their chaotic noise patterns are disrupting proper order across civilized worlds." Within days, the Cultural Purity Division was established. Teams of enforcement officers began hunting down and destroying all human music recordings throughout the galaxy. Possession of human music became a crime punishable by neural reconditioning, or worse. Zilnith received an urgent message from the Council. Return immediately for reassignment. His research into human culture was terminated. All data was to be surrendered to the authorities. "They're afraid," Sarah said, as they prepared to destroy their research notes. "Your people have been using mathematical music as a form of control, haven't they? Keeping populations passive and compliant." Zilnith's admission was barely a whisper. "Yes. We never realized it ourselves, but yes. True music awakens the mind. Mathematical music keeps it sleeping. Then we can't let them destroy this," Sarah said firmly. "We have to find a way to preserve what we've learned." That night, before the Council's agents arrived to collect him, Zilnith made copies of all their research. He hid the data in places the authorities would never think to look and sent coded messages to trusted colleagues throughout the galaxy. As his ship lifted off from Earth, Zilnith looked down at the blue world below and felt something he had never experienced before: hope mixed with determination. The Council thought they had stopped the spread of human music, but they were wrong. The awakening had begun, and once a mind had tasted true music, it could never willingly return to mathematical sleep. The resistance was born in the harmony between chaos and order, between feeling and logic, between the music of the spheres and the music of the heart. Humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy would not be silenced by those who feared its power. Sarah Chen stood at her laboratory window, watching the Vorthon ship disappear into the stars. She smiled grimly and activated her hidden transmitter. "This is Earth Base to all listening stations," she broadcast. "The Symphony of Liberation begins now." The abandoned mining station at the edge of the Kepler system had been silent for decades. Now it hummed with secret activity. Ambassador Elena Vasquez floated through the zero-gravity corridors, her magnetic boots clicking against the metal, flooring as she made her way to the station's converted communications center. 6 months had passed since the Council's crackdown began. The Cultural Purity Division was hunting human music with ruthless efficiency, using their sonic scrubbers to detect and destroy musical patterns in any form of media. But the resistance was growing. "Report," Elena said as she entered the command center. Dr. Sarah Chen looked up from her workstation, surrounded by floating holographic displays showing transmission patterns across the galaxy. "We've successfully broadcast to 47 systems in the past week. The solar storm activity has been perfect cover for our signals." Elena nodded. They had learned to use natural phenomena to hide their transmissions. Solar flares, magnetic storms, and cosmic radiation all helped mask the musical data they sent across space. What appeared to be random noise to the Council's monitoring systems was actually carefully encoded human music. "Any responses from the sleeper cells?" Elena asked. 17 confirmed activations, replied Marcus Webb, their communications specialist. He was a former military engineer who had volunteered for this dangerous mission. The Luminari group on Proxima 7 successfully distributed the Bach collection to 3 neighboring colonies before their cell went dark. Elena felt the familiar pang of loss. Going dark usually meant capture or worse. The Council's punishments for spreading human music had grown increasingly severe. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission. Sarah's eyes widened as she read the decoded message. It's from Dr. Zilneth. He's requesting an emergency meeting. 3 days later, they met on a small asteroid that served as a secret way station for the underground network. Zilneth's ship, disguised as a routine science vessel, docked with their hidden facility. The Vorthon scientist looked different, thinner, more nervous, but with a fire in his black eyes that Elena had never seen before. The situation is worse than you know, he said without preamble. The Council isn't just trying to destroy human music. They're systematically studying it to understand why it works. What have they learned? Elena asked. Everything, Zilneth replied grimly. They know about the dormant neural pathways. They understand that mathematical music has been suppressing natural cognitive development across all species for millennia, and they're terrified. Sarah leaned forward. Terrified of what? Of what happens when entire populations wake up, Zilneth said. I've been monitoring reports from worlds where human music has spread. The changes are accelerating. He activated a holographic display showing data from across the galaxy. On Deltara, the slave populations have been exposed to human spirituals and work songs. For the first time in 1,000 years, they're organizing resistance movements. The Deltari ruling class is panicking. More data appeared. The Luminari pacifist worlds have discovered human war music. Species that haven't fought back against raiders for centuries are suddenly forming defense forces. The pirates who have been preying on them for generations are fleeing in terror. Elena studied the reports with growing amazement. What about the collective? The most significant change of all, Zilneth said. Individual members of the hive mind are developing personal consciousness after exposure to human jazz music. The collective is fracturing. Some drones are becoming individual beings with their own thoughts and desires. The implications were staggering. Human music wasn't just entertainment or art. It was a catalyst for evolution, awakening capabilities that had been dormant for eons. There's more, Zilneth continued. Species are beginning to create their own hybrid music. Zephyrian crystal singers are incorporating emotional variations into their mathematical compositions. The results are transcendent. He played a recording. The sound that filled the room was unlike anything Elena had ever heard. It had the mathematical precision of traditional Zephyrian music, but layered with human-inspired emotional complexity. The harmony made her feel as if she was floating in space among singing stars. Corvani warsmiths are doing the same with their battle hymns, Zilneth said. They're creating compositions that inspire courage and unity instead of just bloodlust. Some Corvani regiments exposed to these new songs have refused orders to suppress civilian populations. Sarah was taking notes frantically. This is incredible. We're not just spreading human music. We're helping other species discover their own authentic voices. Which is exactly why the Council is so afraid, Zilneth said. They've built their power on keeping populations passive and controlled. If every species develops the cognitive enhancement that human music provides, their authority becomes meaningless. Marcus looked up from his monitoring station. We're getting reports of increased cultural purity division activity. They're not just hunting music anymore. They're targeting anyone who shows signs of neural deviation. Neural deviation? Elena asked. Increased creativity, independent thinking, questioning of authority, Zilneth explained. The Council has declared these to be symptoms of human musical contamination. They're using neural reconditioning to suppress the awakened pathways. Elena felt cold fury building in her chest. The Council wasn't just destroying music. They were lobotomizing anyone who dared to think freely. We need to accelerate our operations, she said. How many sleeper cells do we have active? 43 confirmed, probably twice that number. Operating independently, Sarah replied. But the division is getting better at finding them. We lost 3 cells last week alone. Then we need a new strategy, Elena said. Instead of hiding, we go bigger, much bigger. Over the following weeks, the resistance network worked frantically to implement Elena's plan. Instead of small hidden transmissions, they would attempt massive simultaneous broadcasts during periods of high galactic communication traffic. The risk was enormous. If they were detected, the entire network could be destroyed. But the results exceeded their wildest hopes. During the Galactic Trade Summit, while billions of beings across thousands of worlds were monitoring official communications, the Resistance hijacked the commercial networks. For 17 minutes, human music played on every major communication channel in the galaxy. Beethoven's Fifth Symphony reached the crystal cities of Zephyria. Miles Davis's jazz improvisations flowed through the hive mind channels of the collective. Bob Dylan's folk protest songs echoed in the slave quarters of Deltara. And in the war halls of Korvax Prime, the battle hymn of the Republic inspired something the galaxy had never seen. Corvani warriors laying down their weapons in the name of justice rather than conquest. The Council's response was swift and brutal. War Marshal Thorak himself led a fleet to destroy the Resistance's main broadcasting station. The attack was merciless. The station and everyone aboard were vaporized without warning. But it was too late. The music had already taken root in minds across the galaxy. Underground orchestras formed, combining musicians from different species. Hybrid compositions spread through hidden networks faster than the Cultural Purity Division could track them. On Vorth, scientists who had heard human music began questioning the mathematical certainty that had guided their species for millennia. They started experimenting with chaos theory and emotional logic. Their discoveries in quantum mechanics advanced by centuries in mere months. The Luminari discovered that combining their light songs with human harmonic principles created new forms of energy that could be used for healing instead of just illumination. Sick and injured beings across the galaxy sought out these musical healers. Even among the Zephyrians, the most mathematically rigid species, crystal singers began improvising during official ceremonies. Their emotional variations in previously perfect compositions created sounds so beautiful that even High Arbitrator Kethvar found himself moved to tears, an experience he had never had before. Elena received reports of the changes from across the galaxy as she established a new hidden base. Each message brought news of awakening minds, creative breakthroughs, and populations discovering their own voices after eons of imposed silence. But she also received darker news. The Cultural Purity Division was becoming increasingly violent, executing entire populations suspected of musical contamination. Thorak had convinced the Council that drastic measures were necessary to prevent galactic chaos. "They're planning something big," Marcus reported during one of their encrypted communications. "Division forces are massing near Earth. I think they mean to destroy the source." Elena stared at the tactical display showing ships converging on her homeworld. She had always known this day might come, but humanity had already given the galaxy something precious, the knowledge that their minds could be more than they had ever imagined. "Let them come," she said quietly. "The music is already out there. Every song, every melody, every rhythm that awakens sleeping minds. They can't kill an idea whose time has come." She opened a communication channel to all resistant cells throughout the galaxy. "This is Elena Vasquez. The final movement is about to begin. Prepare for the crescendo." The galaxy held its breath, balanced between the silence of control and the abandoned moon of Kepler 442c had once been a thriving mining colony. Now its empty cities provided perfect cover for the most dangerous gathering in galactic history. Representatives from 47 species materialized in the old colony's central assembly hall through various forms of teleportation, quantum tunneling, and cloaked transport vessels. Elena Vasquez stood at the center of the circular chamber, watching as beings she had never imagined working together took their places. Zephyrian crystal singers sat beside Corvani warriors. Luminari energy beings shared space with solid Deltari miners. Even individual members of the collective had come, their pale faces showing expressions of wonder at their own independence. "Friends," Elena began, her voice echoing in the vast space. 6 months ago, most of you had never heard human music. Today, you risk everything by being here. Why? A Corvani female named Sektar stood first. Her tusks were decorated with intricate patterns that Elena recognized as musical notations. "Because for the first time in my life, I understand the difference between fighting for glory and fighting for justice. Your war songs taught me that." Kristek Velthar of Zephyria rose next, light dancing through his transparent form. Our mathematical music was perfect, but it was dead. Human melodies showed us that imperfection creates beauty beyond calculation. One by one, they shared their stories. Dr. Zilneth reported that Vorthon scientists exposed to human music were making breakthrough discoveries by embracing chaos theory and emotional logic. The luminary delegate, calling herself Song of New Light, explained how combining human harmonics with their energy manipulation had created healing frequencies that could repair damaged neural tissue. But it was the representative from Deltara who delivered the most shocking revelation. Commander Thexra had once been a slave soldier in the Deltari military caste. After hearing human spirituals and protest songs, she had led the first successful slave rebellion in 1,000 years. "The songs gave us something we had forgotten," she said, her scarred face fierce with determination. "Hope, and the knowledge that our chains existed only in our minds." Elena felt tears threatening as she listened to each testimony. Human music hadn't just entertained these beings, it had literally set them free. Dr. Zilneth activated a holographic display showing neural scans from across the galaxy. "The changes are accelerating beyond our initial projections. Populations exposed to human music are showing cognitive enhancement levels that should have taken millennia of evolution to achieve." The data was staggering. Problem-solving abilities had increased by an average of 200% among exposed populations. Creativity indices had jumped by 300%. Most importantly, the neurological pathways associated with blind obedience to authority had been permanently altered. "Which is why the Council is preparing their final solution," Zilneth continued grimly. New images appeared, massive fleets gathering around Council strongholds, weapons that had never been used in 1,000 years, of galactic peace being prepared for deployment. "Intelligence suggests they plan to use sonic weaponry to destroy the neural pathways that human music has awakened," he said. "They call it the Great Silencing. Every being in the galaxy will be subjected to mathematical harmonies so pure and overpowering that the chaos processing centers of their brains will be permanently shut down." Shocked murmurs filled the chamber. Song of New Light flickered with distressed colors. "They would lobotomize the entire galaxy?" "To preserve their power, yes," Elena said. "We have perhaps days before they launch this attack, which is why we're here. We need to create something that can counter their weapon." Sektar slammed her massive fist on the armrest of her chair. "Then let us fight. Corvani warriors will—" "No," Elena interrupted gently. "Violence won't work against them. They have superior technology and military force, but they've made one crucial mistake. They think music is just sound waves and mathematical formulas. They don't understand what it really is." She gestured to the assembled beings. "Look around this room. 6 months ago, you were enemies, strangers, or slaves. Now you're here together, risking everything for an idea. That's the true power of music. It connects minds and hearts across any barrier." Dr. Zilneth's black eyes widened with understanding. "You want to create a composition that includes elements from all our species." "More than that," Elena said. "I want us to create the ultimate fusion of everything music can be. Mathematical, precision and emotional chaos, individual expression and collective harmony, ancient traditions and revolutionary innovation." The next 3 days were like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. The abandoned colony rang with sounds that had never existed before as representatives of dozens of species worked together to create the impossible. Zephyrian crystal singers provided the mathematical foundation, perfect harmonic ratios that could resonate through any crystal-based communication system. But they wove these formulas around human emotional melodies that gave the mathematics meaning beyond calculation. Corvani war drummers contributed rhythmic patterns that could synchronize with the heartbeats of most galactic species, but instead of promoting aggression, these rhythms inspired courage and unity. Deltari miners who had learned to sing while working in the depths of their worlds added the deep, resonant bass notes that could carry through any medium. The luminary representatives discovered they could encode harmonic patterns directly into light waves, creating music that could be transmitted at the speed of light across galactic distances. Even the individual collective members contributed something unprecedented, harmonies that promoted individual thought while maintaining group connection. Elena worked frantically to weave all these elements together. Her background as both a diplomat and a musician proved essential, as she translated between different species' concepts of rhythm, melody, and harmony. Dr. Chen, who had arrived secretly from Earth, provided the theoretical framework that made it all possible. "It's working," Sarah whispered in amazement as they tested early versions of their creation. "The neural activation patterns are off the charts. This could awaken dormant pathways we didn't even know existed." But their most important ally was completely unexpected. Commander Korth, a senior officer in Thorax Cultural Purity Division, had defected after being accidentally exposed to human music during a raid. His military experience and inside knowledge of the Council's plans proved invaluable. "The Great Silencing will begin during the Grand Assembly," he reported. "Every world leader, every major population center, every communication hub will be targeted simultaneously. They plan to broadcast their mathematical harmonies through every transmission system in the galaxy." Elena smiled grimly. "Perfect. Then, that's when we'll broadcast our Liberation Symphony on the same networks." "The risks are enormous," Zilnith warned. "If they detect our signal before it reaches full distribution, they'll destroy the source immediately. And if we fail," added Sektar, "they'll silence every mind in the galaxy." Elena looked around at the faces of beings who had risked everything to be here. Former enemies working together, slaves who had become free, scientists who had abandoned rigid thinking for creative exploration, artists who had discovered that imperfection was the source of true beauty. "Then we won't fail," she said simply. The final version of the Liberation Symphony was unlike anything that had ever existed. It began with the pure mathematical beauty of Zephyrian crystal songs, but immediately introduced human emotional variations that made the mathematics dance with life. Corvani War rhythms provided a heartbeat that synchronized with the biological processes of most species, but instead of inspiring conquest, they inspired hope. Deltari mining songs added depth and strength, their bass notes resonating through rock and metal to reach even the deepest underground populations. Luminary light harmonics allowed the music to be transmitted through quantum communication networks at impossible speeds. The contributions from awakened collective members created something entirely new, music that celebrated individual consciousness, while maintaining connection to the greater whole. But it was Elena's final addition that made the symphony truly powerful. She incorporated the sounds of laughter, tears, and human voices speaking in dozens of languages about freedom, love, and the courage to dream of something better. "It's not just music," Sarah breathed as they completed the final recording. "It's the sound of consciousness itself awakening." Elena nodded, her fingers moving over the transmission controls that would soon send their creation across the galaxy. "Let them try to silence this," she said quietly. "Some songs are stronger than empires." The countdown to the Grand Assembly began. Across the galaxy, the Council's forces prepared to impose eternal silence on trillions of minds. But in a forgotten colony on a dead moon, a small group of beings made ready to sing the universe awake. The Liberation Symphony was complete. Now they just had to survive long enough to play it. The Grand Assembly Hall on Nexus Prime had never seen such security. War Marshal Thorax forces surrounded the massive crystal dome where representatives from every major species would gather for the most important session in galactic history. What the delegates didn't know was that they were walking into their own lobotomization. High Arbitrator Kethvar stood at the central podium, his crystalline form pulsing with nervous energy. In hidden chambers beneath the assembly hall, the most powerful sonic transmitters ever built hummed with deadly potential. The Great Silencing would begin the moment all delegates were seated. "Citizens of the galaxy," Kethvar announced as the session began, "we gather today to address the greatest threat our civilization has ever faced. The chaotic noise patterns of the human species have infected our populations with neural deviance. For the good of all, this contamination must be eliminated." 3 billion beings across the galaxy watched the proceedings through quantum communication networks. unaware that those same networks would soon carry the harmonies designed to shut down their capacity for independent thought. Light years away, on the abandoned moon of Kepler 442c, Elena Vasquez watched the assembly through a hijacked transmission feed. Around her, the most unlikely alliance in galactic history prepared for their final gambit. "Transmission systems are active," reported Marcus Webb from his position at the communications array. "We have 17 minutes before they begin the great silencing." Elena nodded, her fingers poised over the controls that would broadcast their Liberation Symphony across every network in the galaxy. "Dr. Zilneth, are you certain the harmonic frequencies will penetrate their sonic scrubbers?" The Vorthon scientist made final adjustments to their transmission equipment. "The Zephyrian crystal harmonics will resonate through any crystal-based system, which includes most galactic communication networks. They won't be able to block us without shutting down their entire infrastructure." "And if they do shut it down?" asked Sektar, her tusks gleaming as she checked her weapons. "Then we fight," Elena said simply. "But not with violence. We fight with music." On Nexus Prime, Thorak was growing impatient. "High Arbitrator, the delegates are assembled. We should begin the harmonization process." Kethvar hesitated. Something felt wrong, though he couldn't identify what. The assembled delegates seemed more alert than usual. Their attention focused with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. What he didn't realize was that many of the delegates had been secretly exposed to human music over the past months. Their neural pathways were already awakened, their minds sharp and questioning in ways the Council had never encountered before. "Very well," Kethvar announced. "For the health and stability of our civilization, we will now commence the planetary harmonization protocol." The hidden sonic transmitters began to power up, their mathematical harmonies designed to overwhelm and reprogram the chaotic patterns that human music had created in galactic minds. At that exact moment, Elena activated her transmission. The first notes of the Liberation Symphony burst across every communication channel in the galaxy, simultaneously. The opening Zephyrian crystal harmonies were so pure and mathematically perfect that they passed through every filter and security system, without triggering any alarms. But then the human elements began to weave themselves into the mathematical foundation. Emotional variations that made the perfect formulas dance with life. Improvisational jazz elements that introduced controlled chaos into rigid structures. Folk melodies that spoke of hope and freedom in languages that transcended species barriers. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. On Nexus Prime, delegates who had been sitting passively suddenly straightened in their seats. Their eyes widened as dormant neural pathways exploded into activity. Some began to weep as they experienced emotions they had never felt before. "What is happening?" Thorak roared, but his own voice cracked as the symphony's Corvani war rhythms reached him. For the first time in his life, the massive warrior felt something other than bloodlust. He felt the desire to protect, rather than conquer. Kethvar stumbled backward from his podium as waves of music washed through the crystal structure of the assembly hall. His entire form began to resonate with harmonics he had never imagined possible. The perfect mathematical certainty that had defined his existence was dissolving into something far more beautiful and complex. "The source," he gasped. "Find the transmission source." But the symphony was broadcasting from hundreds of hidden transmitters across the galaxy. Every resistance cell that had survived the Cultural Purity Division's persecution was now active, amplifying the signal and making it impossible to stop. On Deltara, the slave populations heard the deep mining songs woven into the symphony and rose as one. Chains that had bound them for millennia shattered as they realized their bondage existed only in conditioned minds that were now awakening. The luminary worlds experienced the light harmonics that transformed their energy beings from passive observers into active participants in galactic affairs. For the first time in their species' history, they felt anger at injustice and determination to fight for what was right. Across the collective's hive worlds, individual drones were experiencing the ultimate liberation. the development of personal consciousness while maintaining their connection to the greater whole. The rigid unity that had defined their species for eons was transforming into true cooperation between free individuals. But the most dramatic changes were happening on Vorth and Korvax Prime. Vorthon scientists were abandoning their laboratories to dance in the streets as they felt emotions for the first time. Korvani warriors were laying down their weapons and embracing former enemies as the war rhythms in the symphony taught them that true strength came from unity, not domination. "Stop this," Thorak commanded, but his own troops were no longer responding to his orders. The Cultural Purity Division soldiers were removing their helmets, tears streaming down their faces as they heard the sound of their own awakening consciousness. On the abandoned moon, Elena watched the transformation ripple across the galaxy, through dozens of monitoring stations, but her triumph was short-lived. A massive council battle fleet had found their location and was closing fast. "Elena," Marcus called urgently. "Thorak's flagship is powering weapons. 30 seconds to impact." Elena looked around at the beings who had risked everything to create this moment. Zephyrian crystal singers, whose perfect mathematical music now carried the fire of human emotion. Korvani warriors, who had learned to fight for justice instead of glory. Deltari miners who had sung their species to freedom. Luminary energy beings who had discovered that light could carry hope as well as information. "Keep playing," she said calmly. "Don't stop the transmission, no matter what happens." The Council's weapons struck the colony just as the Liberation Symphony reached its crescendo. But it was too late. The music had already awakened minds across the galaxy, and awakened minds could not be forced back to sleep. In the moment before the blast consumed the abandoned colony, Elena heard something that made her smile. From every world, every station, every ship in the galaxy, voices were rising in song. Beings who had never known they could sing were adding their voices to the symphony. The music was no longer coming from her hidden transmitters. It was coming from the hearts and minds of trillions of free beings. On Nexus Prime, the Grand Assembly had become something unprecedented. Delegates from enemy species were working together, their ancient conflicts dissolved by the realization that they were all part of the same cosmic song. The Galactic Council's authority crumbled as their own members abandoned their posts to join the celebration of consciousness. Thorak stood alone in the ruined assembly hall, his massive frame shaking as the symphony's final notes echoed through his awakening mind. For the first time in his life, the War Marshal understood the difference between power and strength, between conquest and courage, between the silence of oppression and the music of freedom. High Arbitrator Kethavar approached him slowly, his crystalline form now pulsing with colors that had no names in any mathematical system. "It's over, Thorak. The galaxy has awakened." 6 months later, the former assembly hall on Nexus Prime had been transformed into something unimaginable. A concert hall where beings from every species in the galaxy came together to create music that combined mathematical precision with emotional truth. The Galactic Council had dissolved peacefully, replaced by the Harmonic Alliance, a true democracy where every voice could contribute to the cosmic symphony. Elena Vasquez, somehow having survived the destruction of the colony in an escape pod, had been elected as the Alliance's first supreme conductor. But her favorite moments weren't the formal ceremonies or diplomatic functions. They were the quiet times when she stood in what had once been the chamber where humanity was mocked and dismissed, listening to beings who had never known they could sing, raising their voices in harmony. The music they created wasn't perfect. It had all the beautiful imperfections that made human music so powerful: variations in timing, unexpected emotional crescendos, chaotic elements that somehow resolved into transcendent beauty. It was the sound of consciousness itself, awakening and growing and reaching toward possibilities that no single species could have imagined alone.